could remove these counters if I wanted to, but they help remind me where each player is, more or less. So I'll leave them on board. They're not needed anymore because there are no more 20% shares out there. Now, we got a neat dynamic going on here in this stock round. The question is what you want to buy, right? You want to optimize your income within constraints. Well, there were some FJs that were available a little cheap over at the 93 par price, and those went pretty quickly. In fact, the owner of the FJ bought one of those instead of putting money in his own corporation, which you could say, wow, that's kind of weird. But they'll sell out at some point, and here's where things get really interesting. If they sell out now, there's 5 shares in there, he only gets 530 bucks. That's not really a significant piece of those 8 or OE trains that he might be interested in. So buying from the bank, buying from the initial offering where they were cheaper serves 2 purposes. One, it makes him a few bucks right away, but more importantly, it doesn't use all that extra funding at this point. Now, he might have a tricky time getting all those shares floated, but probably not if he just keeps paying out and running his price value up, because as it goes further and further along, the more and more valuable the shares become in terms of they make bigger jumps. And most importantly, they become more valuable than the other shares that are out there. Not just because of the jumps that they're making, but because those jumps aren't so important if you can buy maybe 2 shares of something else compared to 1 share of it. But as the certificate limit starts getting tighter and tighter on players, it becomes more and more important to have high valued shares rather than just high income shares. High income is important too, but the FJ is definitely not doing poorly on income with its little 5 train. Speaking of high income, the VBs, well, everybody's throwing money into the VB treasury, and this is where there's an interesting dynamic which is the companies that are doing well are actually going to get less money, but they'll get it earlier into their treasury, because the companies that are doing a little more poorly on their initial income or whatever at this point are less attractive buys. So they'll sit out there longer in the pool, presumably, unless there's enough money for everybody to fill up their certificate limit, in which case all kinds of weird things happen where, hey, maybe you want to swallow to get some of your shares into the orange so that next operating round you can have more shares and then pull out or whatever. All kind of tricks like that are in play here. Anyway, one danger with the VB is we see he's only got 20%, and a number of other players, well, that number being 2, and there was a third who was considering it, have bought 20%. Are they going to keep following? Because I got 2 companies, man. Yeah, this one sucks, but it won't suck all that bad with an 8 and a 5 train on it. Seeing some very strange behavior here because the owners don't particularly want to sell these shares out, but they're selling out anyway. And I think mainly it's stupidity and not understanding what's going to come out in a given game of this. But we got, let's see, 30% of the VB in the president's hand, which is probably going to mean some VB shares drop before this this round ends, because he's got 20%. Now he can hold that as long as this guy's got his 20%. So if this guy drops one, then this guy's got to drop one, and then those shares kind of become available, but they've already flooded the market here. So I don't think any of those were bought at a discount. Some of the shares, the FJs, were bought at a discount, and there may have been something else. SBs. That was only $2 though, so if that's the kind of margin of error we're talking about, I've certainly made mechanical errors transferring money that have accumulated more than what could be gained off of that. But then over here, we got something interesting where the owner of the KR well, the guy who's going right after him is up to the same 30%. So now he, who's kind of close to his share limit, is going to be forced to dislodge things, right? I'm going to have to kind of mark what people have sold, because these kind of rounds get really crazy when it happens. Well, in response over here, and you can see this stupid kind of holdings, like 30% of the KT. If priority ends up here, I'm in trouble. I got to dump it. But, you know, people are like, well, I got a good chance and it's a good share. But now, if I have to dump it, I have to buy refuse. But he's holding 20% of the KE, same as he is. So he's left with a choice of, well, do I challenge for the KR or do I keep going with the KE, which is a better railroad overall with the Vienna space. So there's just this real, wow, you know, do I want to be challenging two different, do I want to be trying to hold on to my own railway and challenging another one at the same time? That just seems really weird. But somehow that dynamic seems to have been sparked here in a way that I haven't seen it happen. I think it happened sometimes in 1830 when we were first playing, but I feel like some of the disincentives to owning your own company in this are really kind of sparking this kind of behavior in a way that wasn't happening in many of the XX games I've played recently. And everyone's at 12 certificates, and very seldomly do you see the entire certificate limit fill at once in an XX game. But this one seems destined for it, just because of the, hey, you cross the line and you get lots of money, right? Usually it's the end of the game where they happen. I'm not sure this is the end of the game either. Certainly, you know, most of the shares are out, and what's not out, it's going to be hard to move. Like, this guy might start buying up SBs at some point, but right now he doesn't want to do it. He's got some reasons for that. But he's in kind of a weird situation where he's holding 30% of the VB, doesn't necessarily want to run it too well. There's other people holding that 20%. Now, he has anti-priority sitting over here with the priority, means anybody who wants to drop VBs can do it. The danger, of course, is that too many people drop them and somebody can't drop them, but the person who can't drop them the most is him. So everybody's pretty safe with their VBs. The only question is whether or not he makes it an untenable or undesirable company somehow, which could happen. There's no question of that. So everything's sold out except for the SB and the NT, including these suckers, which is why they're up a level. Okay, so nope. Interesting, yeah. You get locked on the wall like that. SB did not go up. Interestingly, because the SB is kind of a nice deal, but because he's not willing to fund it, and because there's only so many certificates, and it's in such a it's a nice deal price-wise, but it's in such a lousy track position, it just doesn't look like it's going to make a whole hell of a lot of money. And the NT, I don't know why the NT is being so... It has prospects, is basically the best you can say about it. It can probably break out, and it may quickly become a desirable stock. But with a low stock value and a fairly low run, it's running at 23. It's not the worst. The SB is definitely worse than that. The KR is worse, but the KR has got a better stock valuation. It just ended up being the least attractive, or second least attractive company out there. And let's push this into the right place so we don't get confused. This was a hefty stock round, and that's going to put our little crystal there. First company with the floodgates open, the FJ. Now, I may have had a mistake on the money here. I had 29 a share. The only way I can think of that happened is I'm running 26 this time. So maybe I ran a 6 train instead of the 5 that's there. I'm not going to worry about it again. I make errors. And there are errors you might not catch if you're not tracking everything, right? But with the floodgates open on the cash, it and the KT have enough money for an OE, an 8 OE. Nothing... They're not going to be able to afford 2 8s. Almost. but they need to make a run each with to collect their mail runs, and then they'll have enough. So on this first run, they're just gonna pay out. Made it through an operating round, which that was in some doubt, and there's some doubt whether or not these trains are going to be able to shift in time before it runs out, because there really is not a whole hell of a lot in here. Now, the KT is where I have to do it, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trains that run before the KT does. At the runs that they're at, they're all above 20 a share, so that's a good $1,000, but there's easily 1,000 in there. There's under 2,000, I think, maybe right around 2,000. You can do a quick cash count to see if the bank's going to break if we let things run out. I don't know how much it matters unless the FJ is going to have to do a swallow, which I think it has to, in order to pay for that big train. To note is a lot of the companies have piles of money on them, a few $100 because of the shares that sold out of here. Enough to do a little bit of track laying, which might improve things, but also enough to drop tokens down. And you can see this is just a mess now. Nobody's getting through there unless they cut their own route, like the KE has here. The NT, hey, they're kind of lucky right now. But KE's got another dot that can slice that in half if need be. So, yeah, it's just, and it's not like he's holding anything of anybody else's in any quantity because he was afraid of it getting dumped on him. He thinks he's doing pretty well. So, we're really not sure where the value is. So, this guy is doing pretty damn well, actually, because of all those FJs he has. So he may not need to make that extra train, right? But shares aren't the only thing. Cash on hand is there too, because not everybody was able to fill out their shares or their portfolio. And then, if it does last, the NT becomes kind of interesting, because they're in the orange. I'll pay out once more, but then they can swallow if need be. If it looks like we'll know whether the bank broke or not by the time they run their third run. But if the bank does not break, they have that opportunity, and then he's got 50% of the company sitting where it doesn't even count against the certificate limit. So he can buy this garbage up, basically, or whatever falls, you know. Because nobody's going to be able to engineer a dump after, you know, once the bank's clearly going to break. If this weren't working, if I didn't have all this money on here, there would be a dump here available. Is that what I want to do or not? I don't know, you know, but I'm not really sure this guy's a competitor. He's not really doing terribly well, and there's always some cost to a dump unless you're saving your ass, right? There aren't many certificates left out there worth buying. I might have trouble filling out my portfolio. I also would be buying shares of something that may or may not have a train. Although it's the VB that's more in danger. I was so worried about this guy selling his VBs. I forgot this guy only has 40% of the KT and somebody's sitting on 30. So, you know, that's a thing to consider. It's not going to happen here because he's just got too much money on these, which might have been, you know, an excuse for why it wasn't dropped. But it also may just be that he's an idiot. Because he also is holding 30% of the KE. That's not going to go anywhere. There's no way that this guy's going to sell off his KE. If he had 50% of a company and share with someone, he could conceivably work a price out, a trade out. I don't remember if this is the game or if it's 44. I think it's 44 that has a "don't be a dick" rule, which I really don't like because I've never seen. Okay, I've seen a couple of players who have been assholes enough that they might actually do it, but almost never see someone make a spite move of selling a train they need, you know, or that's useful for any reason other than their own self-interest. For example, moving a train off their company when they need a space. They might sell it for $1. One of these two games has a rule where you cannot sell a train to another player for anything other than its face value, which I don't like that restriction. I think it's 44, but I'll look.
My attempt to fix this track didn't work. And we got a dot out here that couldn't actually exist. I don't know how big a difference it's been. I'm fucking up left and right on this one. You know, I mean, this is standard 1830 type track here, but it's always been a pain in the ass for me. But when you think about it, hey, there's only two things that could come out of this. What I wanted was the track that cut across here and it would have looped in. I'm going to try to recreate what the track should be. It should be able to do everything that everybody's been wanting to do here. And just not look like a stupid piece of shit like that. Yeah, the track that I expected doesn't actually exist, cannot exist in an 1830 context. It's one where you had this and this, and then a cut across going that way. And there's just nothing like that in this standard set. What that means, I'm going to remove this dot and give them back their $100. Who knows what it actually meant anywhere. But, and try to see if there's something I can do about it. I doubt it, though. Just mad to all the problems. Apparently there's a $200 bill here that I don't know where it fucking came from. Gust of wind or something. Who knows? Was sitting on top of somebody's stack. Now, most of the people's money is tucked in. There's some company. I'm going to try to look at these guys, see if any of them seem to be lacking a lot of money that they should have, but I don't fucking know. It's so fucking hot here, too. I should just close the windows, throw the air conditioning on, and live completely isolated from the outdoors. It's fucking October, and it's 95 degrees. It could have come from a lot of places. I threw it under the SB because, or whatever the hell it is, because I've been wondering why that has so little money for quite some time. I thought these guys would be able to run. Now, I'll give you this much. The SB doesn't have a lot of shares out, so that seems kind of unlikely. So maybe it's the KT. Yeah, let's give it to the NT here. They've been blasting tunnels and stuff. I really don't know. They only blasted one tunnel though, and a lot of money should have gone into their pool. I'm guessing it's their money, and they should have been able to play it before. I'm not sure how it got there though, because the wind flows usually from here across. But it's possible something got sucked across in a way that's not expected. And that would explain where it was, except it was slid under. That seems so fucking unlikely. I mean, it could blow and slide or something. I don't know. Or maybe it's just lost money, you know? Maybe it's money that came out of my hand as I was counting stuff. Maybe it belongs to some person. I don't know. I really don't fucking know. And you know, so many errors, so many problems in this playthrough. But at least you get to see some of how the game develops, if not, you know, everything that's going on. See, now most of his shares were out already, weren't they? Before the trains crashed. Like, nobody's been buying shares of it, have they? Yeah, a few of them were bought. One there. I don't know. Because he had a forced train purchase, so he was wiped out of cash. I'm not going to give it there. I'm just going to... I can't put it back in the bank, because that's kind of a problem, because
the bank is close to breaking. I'll give it to the fucking SB. But I don't think it was their money either. I don't think they had that kind of money. I just don't fucking know where to put it. Well, the runs going forward to the KT have not broken the bank. And as you can see, that extra $200, I mean, that almost certainly wasn't out of the bank, but it could have been. The one way it could have been is if I kind of dropped money while I was making change or something, or put it down. But it looks highly unlikely. It's just, I can't figure out anywhere it could have come from. These guys were tucked in. The companies seem to have about the right money. A little bit of doubt, but whatever. And in all that confusion, I ended up not moving the train, which had to be done, so that was done. And now the KT falls back, producing nothing, but it buys an 8OE. But here's the problem. I no longer have the track to run that as well. I can get to Constantinople and run down through here, but I've been cut down to like a 4 train now, if that's the case. And the FJ isn't much better. It's got a few more spaces, a lot more train with an 8 and a 5. This isn't going to be the huge run I had hoped for because of all the dots. And you can see more track, more dots have shown up because so many companies have, you know, a decent amount of money, but nowhere near where they can get to an 8 train. The thing that jumps in is this doesn't cause any kind of phase change. No trains are destroyed because of this. This is just $1,200 in the bank, which probably isn't going to last more than this set of operating rounds no matter what. It's not going to be the game changer that, you know, if the 8 train was a slow and hard to get train onto the field the way, where are they? I gotta get my games together. The way 1870s big trains sometimes don't come out. Well, usually don't come out in my games. But the way those big trains are kind of such a hurdle to get to, the same way this was, but at least they break. They crack some of the earlier trains and make the players go forward. So there's some use to swallowing once, or in this case, just moving a train. Here, it's tough to say. I'm going to get one operating round with this, and one operating round with 2 trains on it. I don't think the money was worth it. I think I would have been better off avoiding it. And I have the feeling the 8OE is just never going to come out in games that are played reasonably well. Okay, and as we move into the last operating round, I guess the big news is the NT managed to build its breakout here. Can't dot it yet, but we'll have enough money with the mail run to drop another dot. With all the tunnel building, probably people shouldn't be doing this if they want the game to end. And that $1,200 train, it's still in doubt whether or not we're going to break the bank on this operating round. If we don't, this was almost certainly a good idea. And guys like the holder of the NT would really like to see the game go further too, because finally their run is going to be making real money. And again, once he sees what everything else is done, he gets to make the decision, hey, am I paying out? Or am I going to swallow, keep my shares in the orange so they don't count against me, and see what else I can buy? Well, it is going to be a close run thing. I counted the bank. Got to about 1,700 on the 50s. There's probably a couple hundred more sitting in the 20s and less. An estimate of the runs, and it can only be an estimate, is 1,900. You know, it's probably within about $100 as to whether it breaks or not. And so we got to play it out because routes are cut, but trains are improved. No idea. I mean, obviously we have to play it out no matter what, but the question is, would we just start spreadsheeting it because the bank's too tiny? No idea. So we're going to have to keep playing with change, which has been part of the difficulties I've been having. I don't know why. There's so many companies
I'm used to the 1830 situation, and we got 3 more companies on the line here. All this complexity, grabbing the mail, run money, stuff like that. There's more mechanical action with the bank than there is. Plus, the way the shares are laid out can create some weirdnesses as well. And with the FJ's big dual train run, it's big, but nowhere near what it could be if, you know, the dots weren't all over the place. 42 a share. That's going to take a big dent out of that money, though. Remember, there's only 2,000. Well, we just took close to, I'm going to say around 20%. It's a little more than 20%. At this point, I think we can fairly say the bank is breaking. I got maybe $100 in here. One of the miners runs for 240, so we're pretty sure. And at this time now, I have a few options. I could throw an extra $1,000 in. There's 4 $500 bills that are not used for this game, but are used for 1844, I guess. Oh, but that involves making a fair amount of change. It might be best just to either spreadsheet the rest of it out, or and that's easy enough if I can get the values down correctly and mark them, or make a lot of change and put some tokens down, which is what I usually do. But I'm kind of tired of making change and playing with the cash. So, given that only 5 entities are still running, yeah, it might be easiest just to throw the money in. All right, we'll do that. And all the dots killed the big Orient Express run. It only ended up being a 30 run. The FJ with its 2 trains significantly better. The SD with its excellent dot locations, even though only running a 5 train makes 27. Well, 27 seems to be the baseline here. That's actually the low end of the things, but just fine with a 5 train. The only company doing worse than that is the SB down here, which we all knew had shitty track. Got cut off from anywhere it could be. Tried cheating. Actually, the cheating was against it as opposed to in favor of it. They wanted this, which we restored. But they've just basically been able to go nowhere, unable to make any track connection on this run. I didn't even blast through these mountains, although I didn't have the cash for it, but the VB might have been able to help. No, it could have helped up this way or something. But it's just not worth it, because it would have never been able to hook up. Maybe it would have. No, I didn't have the money for this track lay, so it didn't make a difference anyway. So they're making only 17. And at this point, we're at the tail end. And I'm going to take a little bit of a break because I'm not feeling too well. Right, these blank tiles are really killing me. The blank tile facings here. I just didn't make the mistake this time. But know that last time I ran the A, I ran a 1-2 and a 1-2-3, looking and saying, well, they're not really cut off. They're great. And I'm pretty sure I've been using this connection at times again, too. It's just impossible. You know, those gray tiles with all the tokens on them are pretty cluttered. And the assumption is when you go up to gray or brown, in general, you face every direction. The games that don't allow you to face every direction usually have special tiles to prevent it. So a tile like this that has an empty space would only be applicable on like 4 spaces on the board under most of the games. This is it's a matter of training expectations, whatever, but I think people are going to, not just me, are going to find this a barrier or a common error in their 1854 games if they're bringing over their, you know,
they're useful assumptions from other 18xx games. You just look and you think the lines connect, you know? I mean, it looks like it from here, right? You gotta really kind of peek in real close to see, oh yeah, that it didn't actually get there because of all the tokens and everything on there. I think it was a bad design decision. I understand the desire to cut off spaces to allow cities to exist that don't use all 6 entries. And because, you know, it's nice to be able to upgrade this fully or whatever. That side of it I understand fully. What I don't like is the artificial blocking of track. That's always kind of a sore point for me with 18xx. The control over the track lays doesn't seem appropriate in many cases. You know, for example, okay, so there's a lot of track here. Why can't I just build this? And that's where some of the Winsome designs make a little bit more sense. It's actually probably a big reason for the focus that I have on 18xx, which is I like the games with stock manipulation. The more stock manipulation, the less track manipulation, the more interesting it is. Because the stock manipulation is trying to reflect some sort of reality. The track manipulation is too. Both are flawed, but I feel like the track manipulation side of the game is actually really far more flawed. It does not... It prevents things that it's hard to explain why it prevents them. Whereas the stock manipulation just, it doesn't quite reflect the realities of any market, and it's really hard to take such a simple model and make it work correctly. Obviously the one game, well, there are some games which try to go with a simple model that works fairly well, but using, you know, supply and demand type rules, those don't tend to work well in stock market games. The only one that I remember it working, you know, the only one that I know that actually uses pure supply and demand on a stock market game, and Supremacy does it on a commodities market, which is just, it's ridiculously abusable, is Maxiborse, which also has the same kind of, you're making the assumption that the players are the only, if you go with pure supply demand, you're making the assumption that the players are the only people with enough clout to be able to move the market value. And 18xx tries to abstract away the pure market-driven demands, although, hey, 100% of the company is sometimes in players' hands. So really at that point, it's not like the market wouldn't be making offers, though. You know, if I'm offering to sell a share, the market is going to step up and say, well, I'll give you this much for it, right? So, I don't know. Anyway, enough digression on that, which somehow I got there off of me not being able to see something. All right, well, all the runs are paid out. No big shocks towards the end. You know, the NT got its route that it got for one run cut back down to where it was before. It's just really a matter of taking the time to count the money at this point, and I think I need a break before I do that. Although there may be some question about, you know, hey, $200 flipping around, whatever. Most of the likely mistakes probably didn't affect things too terribly much. The big decisions, like with any 30-based game, come around how you float the companies and how you manage the trains. Stock manipulation is less important, even in 30, than sometimes it's given credit for. I like a lot of stock manipulation. I like the ability to dump a company or whatever. But if you run things correctly, you might not need to dump a company. Well, you don't need to dump a company. And really it's more a matter of, oh, maybe I can get some slight advantage off of doing this and really hurt someone. What we ended up with, I always chart out the amount of cash on hand, which is kind of a weird value because it's a combination of how much money you didn't have to invest in shares on the last round, like how much excess money you had that you couldn't invest in shares in the last round, and what you made in the last operating round. With this, we have a big jump, a $500 jump between players 1, who had the 2 minors, and 3. Now, why is 3 doing so well? I would not have guessed 3 was doing well. But 1, from the beginning of the game, with 2 of those minor companies, I thought he was going to do really well. However, as I saw the miners operating over on the little map under here, I was less impressed with what he was getting out of it. But he managed to have a fair amount of money, enough to be able to buy a pair of 2 trains, completely control the miner, and then perhaps most importantly get that dot in Vienna. The timing of the track lays. See, there's a point where things are important, is the timing of the track lays and the dot placement. I don't know, or the capability to do so in general, but it's the timing that's sort of the weird thing that comes down. And it almost feels like a luck factor, especially when I'm playing solitaire, because I usually can't predict how this is all going to fall out. Sometimes I can predict it, usually a little too late to do anything about in an actual 18xx game that I'm playing opposed. But anyway, that's a big enough leap that looks almost insurmountable. Then I calculated out the stocks. Now, stocks is a weird thing because, again, a lot of times all it means is you had the excess money at a particular time. Now, obviously, between the cash on hands and stock, you have the victory conditions. But it could be that you have an opportunity to buy into the company that's at the highest on the track. And that's not necessarily the best buy at the time, but that's what you ended up getting. Often it shows that you had a high stock value, shows that you were doing well before the final operating round, though. And that's why I distinguish the two, because it's quite possible that this income bonus is a bigger deal than the stock bonus. Now, in the case of player 1, he had a lot of excess money going into or coming out of that final stock round. So a lot of that was actually how well he was already doing. The actual stocks he picked don't tend to be terribly good. Why? Well, because his corporation was late starting and is only, in the middle of the pack. And then he absolutely refused to buy a second share of anything, which kind of gives you a baseline. There's other players who, hey, I'll buy 30% of the KE. I think that's going to do well. I'll buy 30%. Well, I don't know about that. But, yeah, there were people who picked up large holdings in other corporations and maybe beat them out on the stock value. So here we see the stock values actually hold pretty even. The only real outliers are our leading player down in the 1200s and maybe the 6th player, who never really got things working right. He started the NT fairly early in the game, and it just didn't do as well as the VB did. It didn't do as well as a number of the other early starting companies. It wasn't started in that first round. It was started in sort of that middle area, when the 3s are coming out and such not. And that tends to be a rough start in the 30 games. I think it may even be rougher here. But where we see the actual big stock value is sitting, the other outlier, the guy who holds the FJ. Because, he's got an extra $10 a share over the next leading player. And because he's pushed so far forward, he managed to get significant stock value over other shares. And that's a lot of his holding here. He's got 60% of the company, 2, 4, 5 of his 12 shares. That's pretty good. He also had the advantage of 2 companies, which means he has an extra 10% share. He did this without one of the miners. He was a guy who had just privates. And so that that works there. Anyway, when we boil it all down, we see a $200 difference between player 1 and player 3 over here. And $200 blew into the bank. Could have been from his cash. Who knows? That's pretty close. And then below that, another couple $100 to our big stock value guy, who, you have to remember, did a swallow. These stock values, he did a swallow over on the KT, but the KT would be up here, which would improve his stock values. Would he have more cash from operating runs? That's hard to tell. It's probably not too big a difference, though. So the stock value is probably the biggest difference that he's looking at here, which isn't a whole hell of a lot. We're looking at $9 a share. Probably not enough. Well, if it is $9 a share, it certainly isn't enough. So say $40 there. It isn't going to make the movement. We're talking about a difference of a couple $100 to second place, and quite a bit going up to first. And then below that, again, we see the distribution kind of falling down. You know, another 250 here to go down there, and then the tail end. Nobody really crashed all that hard. We had people who paid some out-of-pocket expenses, but none of them were too heavy. I think somebody had to pay $300. It may have been this guy. I don't remember. Anyway, if you've watched along, I apologize for the mistakes that I made, the errors that came in through the mechanical play of the game. That just happens in my solo games, and I still feel like there's quite a bit that you can take away from playing one of these games solitaire, even if you make all kind of mistakes, or perhaps from watching me play. So, yeah. One of the impressions, so I have a number of impressions. One is, well, the miners are indeed as good, can be as good as they look like they're going to be. They're worth that $155 or whatever. It's worth getting a couple of them and seeing if you can work them together and make a few extra bucks that way. And then no matter what happens, they seem to come out okay. They're in a rich area. If you can get the one has a little bit of a boost, because if you start the one, you get to choose the better location, which is probably usually going to be the one closer to Vienna. Now, you still have to have an attractive offer to get another attractive company to come join you. Otherwise, you're going to be a couple of ugly folks who have ugly kids, you know, right? Let's see, what else? The question of whether you should start a corporation early. So, obviously you can't if you're filled up with those miners. And I think the first option, and I wouldn't guarantee this, but I would suggest that the first option is get 2 miners if you can. If you can't manage that, it doesn't really seem like there's all that much difference. Let's see. Player 3, I think, held the presidency of the SD all game. Ran it as a good solid company. It took some stock hits from people selling it, which is why it's below where the FJ is, really. Well, should be up here, right? And it operated pretty well overall. And I got a second place finish. Now, he had a miner and, you know, a starting company that maybe he didn't have a big percentage in all along. Maybe he made good choices throughout the game. It's hard to see anything particularly outstanding about this as compared to, say, this guy who got to play around. Yeah, like I said, it probably didn't cost him too much shifting that train. over here with the VB, how come he's got so little at the end? Well, yeah, he didn't invest later in his own company. Ends up at good stock value, fair run. Oh, I know why the SD kicks ass. Because he got all the good dots going. Yeah. So he had the best 5 run you can manage over there, basically. So that's pretty good. The SD on the VB, on the other hand, kind of languished for a long time, running more train than he needed at times. Finally got the breakout because the NT built it for him, and then screwed the NT over by dotting him out of it. So yeah. Not that the NT was doing all that well. I don't have, as I'm playing yet, a very good idea of who's winning. I had a pretty good idea. Well, I mean, this guy was clearly ahead when I started seeing those 260 runs coming off of the B company. But I'm not sure how much of that was just the luck of being able to slap that dot in there. How much is luck? Well, you can arrange those things, but it's hard to do. And it's really hard to predict sometimes what other people are going to do. Of course, when I'm playing solitaire, each of my players is probably paying far less attention than I would pay in an actual game. So, take the results however you wish. I'll come back with a review for this instead of doing one for the combined box, because I want to look at 1844 as well. And we'll see what we got.